And we are joined now on Zoom by Congressman Seth Moulton, who's here to pitch us all on North-South Rail Link, an idea as old as fraught as the Big Dig. He says it's now time. We're going to talk to him about that and some other things. Congressman, thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, great to see you. Thanks very much for having me on.
Hi, Congressman. We are going to talk at great length about North-South Rail in just a moment, but we wanted to get your take on the news that Israel's army is now saying that it's going to pause daytime fighting along a particular route in southern Gaza in order to facilitate the delivery of more aid. Now, you've been on the show many times. You served 4 terms in Iraq. You've actually talked about sort of the battle strategy of dropping bombs from a great distance above, and whether or not that actually works versus the destruction it causes. Do you think, talk a little bit about your reaction to this pause, and specifically, do you think that this pause during these daytime hours in any way moves the needle on a longer ceasefire?
Well, it doesn't hurt, but what's fundamentally needed is not just a pause, not just a short break in the fighting, but a change in strategy from the Israelis. The Israelis, for the longest time now, have been making all the mistakes that we made in Iraq and Afghanistan when we first went in, and we thought that you could kill your way out of an insurgency. And you just can't do that. You have to actually win over the support of the population. You have to prove yourselves a better alternative with a better political future than what the terrorist organization is offering. And you have to fundamentally show that you're there to protect the people, in this case, the people of Gaza, not kill them. And so if they just have a pause and get a little food distributed, but then go back to the same way of fighting, dropping a lot of bombs, killing a lot of civilians in the course of going after these terrorists, they're not going to win the war. And at the end of the day, we should all want Israel to defeat Hamas, because neither Palestinians nor Israelis will be safe or free as long as Hamas, a terrorist organization, is running the Gaza Strip.
Well, of course, Hamas has refused to release the remaining hostages, but we did see the Israeli forces go in and get 4 of the hostages, release those hostages. But in the course of that, depending on whose version you believe, either 100 Palestinians or maybe close to 300 Palestinians were killed. Andrea mentioned you're talking about bombing from above is not necessarily the best strategy, but this effort to just get these hostages on the ground turned into causing dozens and dozens and dozens of Palestinian deaths. So where does that leave us?
Obviously, we want to do everything we can to get the hostages back. But the cost of this operation was enormously high. And, if I were one of those hostages, I would want to come home too. I wouldn't want to find out that a bunch of innocent Palestinian kids were killed in the course of getting me out, when we could have come to a deal at some point and just done essentially a prisoner exchange. That's what should be the end game here, as far as the hostages go. And when Israel was talking about just going into Rafah for the first time a few weeks ago, one of the fundamental questions I asked is, how are you going to be able to get the hostages out when they're held alongside, in some cases, some of the senior Hamas leaders? Although the headline is that we got these 4 hostages back, there's also news that apparently some more hostages were just killed in an Israeli airstrike.
Yeah.
Which is really concerning. And again, the point is, this is not the right strategy. You have to change strategy, not just pause the fighting, but change the strategy. Recognize that there has to be a political endgame that's appealing to both sides, not just to Israelis, but to the Palestinians as well. And fundamentally, that is why Netanyahu's war cabinet is falling apart, because he still doesn't have an end game.
Okay, so one more quick thing before we get to North-South Rail. We just want to get your take on the latest with the Supreme Court deciding that bump stocks do not a machine gun make, and how Democrats are going to be able to use the Supreme Court in the upcoming election, between that and the reversal of Roe versus Wade and Dobbs, whether or not it's going to be an effective strategy to message around the Supreme Court, and whether or not you think we're on the right path for this, or what needs to be done. If enough isn't being done now, what more needs to be done?
Well, let me just start by saying what a shame it is that the Supreme Court has become so political. I don't like the whole
Yeah.
idea of using the Supreme Court in an election one way or the other. But the reality is this is an extraordinarily conservative Supreme Court engineered by Mitch McConnell, who broke decorum and broke past precedent in the Senate to force in conservative nominees. We all remember the story. And as a result, we have these very partisan rulings coming out of the Supreme Court. Now, the one thing I'll say about the bump stock piece is that there is a degree to which you can read the ruling as just, we're not for or against bump stocks. We just think this is something that should be legislated by Congress. Well, myself and a fellow Republican, right after the Las Vegas shooting, put together a bump stock ban in legislation. We had a bill to ban bump stocks. And at the time, it was the single most bipartisan piece of gun reform legislation that we'd seen in, I don't know, 20 or 30 years. So it was incredibly bipartisan at the time. But at the end of the day, the leadership wouldn't bring it up and we couldn't get it across the finish line. I do think that the real culprit here is Congress and its congressional Republicans who won't listen to their own constituents, who want reasonable gun reforms because they're so beholden to the NRA. So while it's easy to attack the Supreme Court, and there are a lot of frustrations with the Supreme Court, this is also a case of having Republicans in Congress who refuse to have the political courage to just bring sensible gun laws to America.
We're talking with Congressman Seth Moulton. Okay, so let's get to North-South Rail, and we're going to join Yvonne Abraham, the columnist of the Globe. She said, "Bless Seth Moulton for pushing us to go bigger." So we're right with Yvonne on this one. And when you have this diagram, the Globe had this diagram, and when you see this diagram, and you realize there's really about a mile between North Station and South Station. That's all.
Right.
It's so close.
Yeah,
This should be
so
so
close.
easy.
Yeah.
I mean,
people
dozens
regularly
of cities
walk
have
it
done
every
this all
single
around
day.
the world.
Yeah.
So
this is not that people are afraid this is like another big dig, which, by the way, it had never been done. I mean, they'd never built a new highway under an existing one, like freezing the ground to keep the old one up. I mean, it was an engineering marvel.
It was.
But we don't have to do that. Like, this is very simple, just a tunnel under the city. London just completed one that was like 5 times as long. We can do this, Boston. And now we are actually facing a choice. So it's no longer just a nice project to have in the future when we finally get around to it. We have a choice to make between expanding South Station or doing the rail link. Both solve an urgent capacity issue at South Station. So we've got to make the right choice. And this new study just shows very convincingly that the rail link is the right choice.
Right. Well, the study shows that the expansion of South Station is an impermanent solution, right?
It's kind of amazing. I mean, we've been talking about expanding South Station for, I don't know, about a decade. The price keeps going up. It's about $4 billion. And the amazing thing is, it's only going to last 2 decades. It's only going to last 20 years, and it's going to be obsolete. I mean, this is nuts, folks. This is nuts. Not only that, but to expand South Station, we have to build a rail yard at Widett Circle. And because Widett Circle is not climate resilient, it's going to be an underwater rail yard. It's going to be flooded every time there's a major storm. I mean, this is crazy. So we've just been sort of, moving along thinking that this makes sense the whole time when the rail link would solve the same problem. So I just said, hey, can we just do a study that actually compares the two projects? They both solve the same issue. Let's compare the 2 projects. That had never done before. And look, I'm biased because I've looked at this before. I thought the rail link would come out ahead. I had no idea it would be so black and white. I mean, it's startling just how much better the rail link is for Boston and the entire region than expanding.
How? Tell us what the benefits are.
Well, it's pretty extraordinary. I mean, first of all, let's just make sure people understand what this is all about. I mean, this is about getting on a train in Andover and not just stopping at North Station, but flowing right through the city to the South Shore. Or let's say you're in Andover and you want to go to Foxborough to a Patriots game, and your train happens to be going to the South Shore. Well, you get off at a station in Boston. Maybe it's South Station, maybe it's a new Central Station. You just wait on that same platform for 4 or 5 minutes for the next train to come through to Foxborough, and you connect seamlessly to Foxborough. So all of a sudden you can work on the North Shore and live on the South Shore. You can go all the way from Salem to Hyannis in the summer without any traffic because you flow right through the city. I mean, this is just like inconceivable to people from Boston, and yet this is totally natural all over the rest of the world. We're just used to, well, you either live on the south and you can only go to South Station, or you live on the north and you can only go to North Station, and that's it. I mean, you can't even take a train from New York to Maine, even though Amtrak serves both destinations, because New York trains stop in Boston because they can't go 1 mile under the city and then start again to go to Maine. So this would be totally transformative for living and working around Boston. We're talking about creating 15 times more housing than South Station expansion.
That's amazing.
We all know that we need more housing, 15 times more than South Station expansion. How in our right mind can we just expand South Station when this rail link for not that much more money would create 15 times more housing? That's just one of the amazing statistics that comes out of this study.
Andrew Cabral reminded me before the show that Governor Deval Patrick years ago did this crumbling bridges rehab, spending $3.8 billion, not to replace the bridges, but to kind of shore them up so they last for a few
Right.
more years. So anyway, Congressman,
We have trouble with big infrastructure
Yeah.
projects, and we're actually going to be talking about this a little bit. I think we do a talker later on about our ability to think big in Massachusetts, and have we sort of lost that ability to think big? We shrink from, the most innovative things, and this North-South Rail is clearly, in that category. Do you think that it's about our ability to think big, or do you think that we've lost faith in our leaders' ability to ride herd over big projects like this and to do them in as timely and as cost-efficient a fashion as taxpayers would like?
It's a great question. I think it's a bit of both. I think we need to think big, and we're not going to fix our decrepit rail system by just patching it up, as you say. And you go to Europe or Asia and you see what these regional rail systems look like, with clean, modern, fast, quiet, all-electric trains that come frequently. That's what you would get with the rail link. You expand South Station and you're just getting more of the same. And I think that it's clear in Boston that just patching up the T is not enough. We need a transformational change. Let's catch up with the rest of the world. But the encouraging thing about this rail link is that in some ways it's a big project, but in a lot of other ways, it's something that a lot of other cities have already done. There's an amazing story from the Civil War about how Abraham Lincoln was trying to go south to Washington, and he had to travel through Baltimore, and he had to deal with a very contentious crowd in the middle of Baltimore because there was no rail tunnel under Baltimore.
Yeah.
But Baltimore fixed that over 100 years ago. Okay, they fixed that problem. We can do this, Boston. We're a little bit behind. In fact, the rail link was initially postponed due to the onset of World War I. So we have known for a long time that this makes sense, and we can do it. I want to say one other thing about this, though, that's important, because the specifics matter here. Some people have said, Seth, the T can't even, keep its trains on the tracks. How is the T going to do this? And the answer is the T is not going to do this. When other cities have done these projects successfully, they have formed separate entities, a public-private partnership, bringing the best experience from the private sector with the proper oversight from the public sector together to basically create, think of it as a specific company just to build this tunnel. That's what we would do in Boston. So don't think you'd have to put the T in charge of this project.
That's a very important point, because that's what most people are going to say.
Congressman, you talked as well in the study you did with the Harvard Kennedy School about investment and the money that would come back. You've talked about jobs. A question from Jackie in Haverhill is about housing, how that would increase. So elaborate on those points: the return of the money, the housing, and the jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, today in Massachusetts, you can live north of the city and work north of the city, or work around North Station, or you can live south of the city, vice versa. But you can't get a job in Brockton or Framingham if you live up here in Salem. It's just impossible to commute. All of a sudden, with the rail link, you're going to be able to go faster than driving all around the Commonwealth. That's going to dramatically increase options for housing, but also for jobs. Now, a lot of housing is incentivized by transit-oriented development. I mean, we see housing growing up around train stations, especially around rapid transit stations. organic housing growth that comes from much better service due to the rail link will create, it's estimated, about 150,000 more units. That's 15 times as many as would be created by expanding South Station. So the housing bill that the legislature is moving forward, very impressive. It's an important step in the right direction. But to put it in perspective, this project would create over 3 times as much housing as the housing bill. I mean, that's what it means to have better transportation all around the Commonwealth. Just think, hey, by the way, the Celtics. Let's talk about the Celtics for a second. All right.
Sure.
What if you live in Brockton or Framingham and you want to go to the game at North Station? I mean, today you'd have to fight bumper to bumper traffic for over an hour, pay $40 for parking. If you had the rail link, one-stop ride, 25 minutes right to North Station, and you're there. That's the change.
You know, again, North Station and South Station are a mile apart. It really is insane. As you said, Andrews, people are just walking with their bags between one or the other. It is kind of crazy. So what are the politics here? What needs to get done to convince people this is a good idea?
Well, I think one of the biggest concerns is people say, oh, we just can't handle a big project. So we have to show how this is not going to be the T or Mass DOT that takes this on. We've got to develop some models and show some examples from other cities of how they've done this successfully with a real public-private partnership, with private companies that are incentivized to do this at the lowest cost as quickly as possible, but with the proper public oversight. That's the model for actually getting this project done. I think we also have to talk more to local leaders. I mean, we've just started sharing this study. Of course, it just was completed, so this is breaking news here. But we started talking to local leaders whose communities would be affected by this. One great example is this area at Woodette Circle. This is where they wanted to put the Olympics back when
I remember.
Olympics bid, right? And now the T has it because they want to build a rail yard. If all these trains come into South Station and expanded South Station, they just stop there. So you need a place to store them, because they don't flow through the city, obviously. They just stop at South Station, unload their passengers, they back out empty, total waste of space, and they need to sit at a rail yard. That's what they want to do with Woodette Circle. Well, if you build the rail link and trains just flow through the city instead of stopping, you don't need a rail yard there. That becomes a brand new neighborhood. And, the one problem with Woodette Circle I mentioned earlier is that it's not climate resilient. The land is too low. So this rail yard that he wants to build, would literally be underwater with the changing climate. So what you really need to do is raise the ground 3 to 5 feet to make Woodette Circle climate resilient. And I'm trying to think, where could we get the dirt to raise Woodette Circle 3 to 5 feet? Oh, that's right. If we built a tunnel. So we literally just pull the dirt out, put it at Woodette Circle, and you have a brand new neighborhood connecting South Boston and Dorchester. I mean, the climate benefits to this, the racial equity benefits to this are pretty extraordinary. Do you want a rail yard next to Dorchester, or do you want a brand new neighborhood? That's the choice.
How much of this is just not ever wanting to spend the money? I mean, because even if you look at the big dig, and I get what people say, although we should look at the big dig as a way to ensure accountability. We should take it as the cautionary tale for accountability that it is. But it happens every single time a big idea is floated. It's just, we're not giving you the money. We don't want to spend the money on it right now.
Well, I think we have to get a handle on the costs, but that's really what's driving this decision here, because we've already committed to expanding South Station. So we've already set aside the $4 billion essentially that it costs to do this. The rail link would cost about $8 billion, although I'll tell you, that's a very conservative estimate in the sense that we're probably overestimating the cost. A lot of cities have done this for much less, maybe even $5 or $6 billion. But the point is that when you've already committed to a $4 billion project that you don't need to do if you do the rail link instead, then you're only talking about a few $billion of additional money. And this project pays for itself. I mean, just the increase in fare revenue, because so many more people will ride the system, will cover that cost. Imagine the development potential, just the new tax base that would come from an entirely new neighborhood at Woodette Circle. You put that all together, it more than covers the cost of this project. So this is what's unique about this moment. For decades, we've been talking about this as a nice to have, a good thing to do in the future. Now it really is a choice. We've got this $4 billion set aside for South Station expansion. Are we going to do it on a project that will last 20 years? Or are we going to just put a little bit more into a project that will transform transportation around the Commonwealth for a century? And by the way, at the end of the day, more than pay for itself. $31 billion in benefits come out of this project. When you tally up all the increased tax revenue, the increased economic benefits, the carbon savings, huge carbon savings, the increased fare revenue, all these new riders, all the housing development that comes from this, $31 billion in benefits for an $8 billion cost. And we've already set aside 4 of that 8 billion.
Okay,
I'm sold.
I'm sold. Absolutely. Let's start building. Thank you.
Hey, get a shovel. We need to start digging, Marjorie.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Appreciate it.
We've been speaking with
you.
Seth Moulton, U.S. Representative for Massachusetts 6th District.